Drawing from their response summary and the Phase 2 draft regulations that were published in June 2026, this is my summary of how Biosecurity Tasmania responded to the submissions that were made in Phase 1 of the draft Primary Produce Safety Horticulture Produce regulations. Essentially, I'm going to take you through the good, the bad, and the ugly of Biosecurity's responses to the submissions. Unsurprisingly, all concerns raised by large commercial producers and industry organisations have been addressed. So businesses that are already accredited under industry food safety schemes will have their existing food safety plans and the audits that they commission under those schemes recognised for the purpose of the Tasmanian regulations. So any duplication has been clearly removed. The request by many of these organisations for a tiering system to appropriately modify the proposal to suit smaller growers has been responded to. So there are essentially 3 tiers of regulation. So the Tier 1 notification applies to growers who have less than 1 hectare under cultivation. Tier 2 accreditation applies for growers producing primary produce on 1 to 5 hectares, and Tier 3 for more than 5 hectares. These regulations were never about large producers. The people intended to be regulated are growers who haven't already committed to industry schemes. So there's nothing surprising about the fact that the concerns of larger commercial producers and industry organisations were met. Commercial berry producers are, as was proposed in Phase 1, only subject to Tier 1 notification. That applies to all berry producers, whether they've got, more than 5 hectares of, plastic tunnels growing hydroponically on the side of our highways, or they've got, they're a market gardener with 5 blueberry plants alongside their vegetables. So the Tier 1 notification applies unless the producer is required to be accredited under another food safety scheme. So if they are required to be accredited for their production of leafy vegetables, melons, eggs, meat or dairy, then a Tier 2 or 3 accreditation will apply to those berry growers. So basically, if you are a monocropper, you're in Tier 1. If you're a larger mixed enterprise, you could fall into the more burdensome accreditation for berries. Another positive change in the Phase 2 proposal is that germination has been excluded from the definition of primary produce production unless the producer is growing seed sprouts for eating. So this means that nursery activities are not regulated under these regulations. So that's a really good outcome from Phase 1. A confusion that, in my opinion, is unresolved is the scope of the definitions of berries, leafy vegetables and melons in the draft regulations. But the Biosecurity in its summary report has stated many times that the definitions, the scope of produce intended to be included in the regulations is consistent with the primary produce production standards. Those definitions in those standards are actually broader than the ones in the Phase 2 draft. I might look deeper into this separately in a different video, but my inclination is to assume that the definitions will be made consistent, as that's clearly what's been intended. Okay, so now looking at the concerns of small-scale commercial producers, their concerns have been partly met. So a tiered system was one of the primary requests that were made by that sector, and in fact, before the consultation process ended in phase one, Biosecurity Tasmania had committed to a tiered system. The widely requested 2 hectare area for tier 1, however, has not been what the outcome is. The outcome is up to 1 hectare. There were also privacy concerns raised because whether you're in tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3, you're effectively notifying or becoming registered through Biosecurity Tasmania, and so then your details will go on a public register. So in the phase 2 document, it's been made clear that where people are growing at their home, that information will not be published in a fully accessible form. However, the details are on the public record and can be sought by request at the discretion of biosecurity officers. So the privacy concerns that were raised have been partly addressed. Cost of being regulated was a really big concern for small-scale commercial producers. The costs have been reduced for many producers, but not eliminated. So there are no fees for tier 1, but there could be costs involved in meeting the food safety planning requirements, which again, I'll look into that separately. And there are fees for tier 2 producers, so some small-scale commercial producers who are between 1 and 5 hectares would be paying initial and then annual fees. In addition to fees, tier 2 producers are going to be required to engage in annual audits. Despite this being a compulsory public scheme, a government scheme, the auditors will be private consultants, and those private auditors will charge the producer fees. So you have to use an auditor who has been appointed by Biosecurity Tasmania, and you will be paying for it as the producer. So those costs could be several $1,000s annually. Obviously, I'm not an auditor, so I'm not exactly certain what they charge. Small-scale commercial producers' concerns about the desirability of regional food security, disaster resilience, biodiversity, local economic activity, and climate resilience through low food miles were not things that were responded to. Okay, the phase 2 response is bad or ugly for home producers and backyard growers. Barely any of the concerns raised by this group have been addressed, and in fact, the phase 2 documents reveal an extremely limited exemption for home horticulture. So many activities that typical backyard growers and home producers engage in will fall outside that exemption. If your activity falls outside the exemption, then you are subject to tier 1 notification category. So here are some of the activities which are exempted. So there's 3 activities that are exempted: growing for yourself, to consume within your own household, giving your produce away to family, friends and neighbours, or allowing friends, family and neighbours to come and harvest their own produce at your home, so long as you're giving it away. So those are the only activities which are exempted. All other activities that you might engage in that fall within the definition of primary produce production are subject to regulation. So assuming your typical backyard grower is not going to have more than 1 hectare, so that means your Tier 1 notification. And Biosecurity, I have confirmed this by email with them because I was quite surprised. They have confirmed that while I might give my produce to friends, family or neighbours in a one-on-one interaction, if I take that same produce down the road to my community food swap and contribute it on the table, that is considered supplying the community more generally, and that is a regulated activity. And so I will need to have gone through the requirements of Tier 1 notification to do that. If I advertise my produce to give away on social media, email or newsletter, again, that's giving it away to the broader community, so that's going to be regulated. If I sell produce to anybody, including friends, family and neighbours, so I'm allowed to give it to them, I'm allowed to sell it to them, but if I sell it to them, then legally I would be required to have gone through the notification requirements. Similarly, if I ring up my local community house and say, hey, I've got a few trays of extra berries because I'm overloaded with silverberries, would you like to come pick them up for your food relief pick up tomorrow? I would have to be complying with the regulations to be able to do that. If I wanted to offer my produce for sale at a roadside stall, at a market, by retail or wholesale, then I'm regulated. And if I give my produce or sell my produce to somebody who operates a food business or a horticulture produce business, so if I give it to the jam lady down the road, if I give her berries to use in her jams because the berries are going to go to waste otherwise, then that's a regulated activity, even though I'm not it's not a commercial transaction. If I operate an agritourism business and I'm feeding people greens from my vegetable garden, then that is a regulated activity. So more ugly outcomes in terms of what home producers and backyard growers asked for. In my opinion, the proposed regulatory requirements are entirely disproportionate to the scale of activity. Biosecurity Tasmania disagrees with me about that though. Regulation is going to discourage long-standing community practices including food swaps, roadside honesty stalls, fundraising produce sales and informal local food networks. The Biosecurity Tasmania has not been able to provide any evidence of outbreaks of disease from home-scale producers, so nothing has been produced. Many people requested that in their submissions. And effectively, the fears that many of us have about overreach by the government, loss of community autonomy and erosion of the way of life we hold dear have pretty much all been confirmed or ignored by the Phase 2 proposal. It's much the same failure to address the concerns of consumers and community organisations, because the Phase 2 documentation really doesn't address those core concerns about food security, affordability, resilience, local food networks, and how important they are to many Tasmanians. Effectively, this leaves us with a situation where the overwhelming majority of submissions raised concerns that Biosecurity Tasmania has chosen not to respond to beyond its view that Tier 1 notification is appropriate for tiny growers, home producers, food swaps, local food relief, schools, and other not-for-profit contexts. So that's effectively their answer is Tier 1 notification is proportional and appropriate. So if you disagree with them about that, that is something that you might include in your submission for Phase 2. In my next video, I'll unpack the dirt on Tier 1 notification and why I disagree that it is proportionate and appropriate.